Okay, welcome everyone to the second webinar in our New Mavericks Integration Zone series. It's about big vision to concrete reality, how to harness character, capacity, and chemistry to stay in the zone. My name is Raamon Newman. I'm one of the founders of New Mavericks, and I want to extend a very warm welcome and acknowledgement to our very special guest speakers joining us today. We have on the line with us Dr. Warren Blank, who's the president of the Leadership Group. He's one of the top management leadership trainers in the world. We also have joining us Dr. Alaric Aranenda, who's president of the Leader's Brain Consulting Group. He's a neuroscientist who is doing some very cutting-edge research on leaders' brains. Also on board here, we have my New Mavericks founding partner, Paulo D'Angelo, and my New Mavericks co-host, Michael Sternfeld, who will introduce Warren and Alaric more formally shortly. So let me just give you a little bit of background on our topic. Now, big vision is really about the wholeness of what you want to see happen, and every great leader has this. And harnessing character, capacity, and chemistry are really the qualities and intelligences required to bring that vision into concrete reality. So leaders, really use their character, their capacity, and their chemistry to create an integration between their vision and the parts to create, that concrete reality. So just in terms of, defining what we mean by character, that's very much on the level of who you are, what you're made of, what the qualities of your innate being are. Capacity is very much about the depth and breadth from which you lead and your leadership behaviors. And chemistry is very much about your hard wiring, your constitutional makeup, and your brain. So just a quick story here that kind of fills in, why we're talking about this subject. And what all of us have found from our experience of working with top leaders around the world for so many years is that one of the biggest issues they have is taking their big visions and turning them into concrete reality. So, for example, one of our top clients that we work with, he leads a $6 billion per year revenue company, and he took the company from 1.9 million to 6 billion in a span of 25 years, and he was awarded CEO of the Year for that achievement. He often gets asked, both within his company and outside his company, when he's looking at a new deal or creating a new business, the question he gets is, how are we going to do this? And his stock answer is generally, I don't know, but we will. So what is it that allows him to say these 6 words? Well, this is why we have our very distinguished speakers. They're going to really elaborate on some of the secret ingredients that allows leaders to have the confidence, the competence, and the capacity to make their big visions a real concrete reality. So these secret ingredients can be boiled down to the 3 C's in our title: the character of who we are, what we're made of, what our very being and essence is, which is pretty much our greatest intangible asset as a leader, having that very strong character quality. The capacity is, again, the depth and breadth of our ability to bring our character into our work and leadership through our behavior. So it's like the software that runs us. And chemistry is very much the structure of how we're wired in terms of our mind, our heart, our brain, and our body. And it's like our hardware in the form of our brain and constitutional makeup. So New Mavericks is very much about taking these 3 principles, which we're looking to translate into best practices, and applying them to be and stay in what we call the integration zone. And this is when we're in this integration zone that we find the byproduct is integrated success. We are able to just more skillfully manage all parts, not only of your business, but your life, to bring out, and make your big vision a real reality without compromising, yourself in any way. So Michael Sternfeld and I are going to give you a wholeness overview on the first of the 3 C's, the character quality. And character, as I've mentioned, is who we are and what we're made of. And most people think this is kind of like our personality or various attributes that we have. But the real bottom line of who we are and what we're made of is this value that's primordial to all of us. It's consciousness. And consciousness is the most intimate source of who we are. It's common to everyone. Without it, we wouldn't even be able to perceive anything, let alone even be able to hear each other right now. So consciousness is really a leader's and their team's most precious resource, because all awareness, all thoughts, feelings, and creativity and energy for speech and action come from this field of consciousness. Einstein's, said, as commonly quoted, problems cannot be solved on the level of consciousness that created them. So new Maverick leaders know that current performance cannot be changed really without changing consciousness. By having greater consciousness, it gives us more of a clearer vision. It gives us a stronger character. It gives us greater capacity, and it gives us better chemistry to move forward more powerfully. So what really is consciousness? People can think of it in terms of the faculty of their self-awareness or self-identity or self-image. But really what it is, it's an unseen field of intelligence. It's kind of like wireless communication. We don't see wireless communication work, but it does. And we're literally swimming in this unseen field of consciousness 24/7. And it's really like consciousness is that light in a film projector that enables us to project our thoughts and images of our mind clearly onto the screen of life and our environment. So the more powerful consciousness we have, then we're more clearly able to project our vision and actions into the world. So for example, the organizing of consciousness is seen when we meet the right person at the right time, even without planning it logically. And the more consciousness we have, we find that more of the synchronicity takes place. And there's a great quote I always like to share. It says that great people gain success primarily from the purity of their consciousness and not from external, intellectual, or physically organized means of action. And I'm just going to share a quote from one of our clients about his experience of having more consciousness. He said, "I feel like I've been supercharged over the last year. I wake up earlier with more creativity. I seem to have more time in my day, even though I'm busy. I'm more in the now than I've ever been. My staff comments everything I touch is turning to gold, and I am more aware to avoid getting tired, as I now know this prevents the wheels from falling off. I've realized I no longer want to face challenges and problems like in the past. I want more of what I'm experiencing, of having this support of nature by having more consciousness." This is from Jason Gunn, who is the founder and managing director of a fast-growing organic fast food retail restaurant business called Oliver's Real Foods. So consciousness really is that underlying field of who we are. And this may seem kind of abstract reality. So I'm going to pass it over to Michael to elaborate on how to take this really powerful, the most powerful field of intelligence, consciousness, and how to integrate it into our personality and our character. And just a bit about Michael and why he's good at and qualified at explaining this is because Michael is probably the organizer of well over 200 events, live events. He's a very renowned producer. He produced the Change Begins Within event, one of the producers of that event in New York City that was hugely successful with the David Lynch Foundation. He's even organized concerts for the Beach Boys. And Michael has a vast range of skill, not only in the area of producing, but also in the area of being a body presence integrator. And he did that for many, many years. And he's also a very skilled dancer, a professional dancer. And so Michael has a great understanding of how to bring consciousness into the body and into expression. So Michael, please share with us your thoughts on this.
Raamon, thank you. So, consciousness is primary, and Raamon just kind of gave the foundation. And you could say consciousness really is, it's a state of being. But a lot of the times we use that term state of being in the sense of just the quality of our character, how we, where we come from the inside. But what I wanted to talk about now really is how consciousness comes into our our inner state and expresses itself through our personality. But I want to focus on this concept of being in the zone, because that's an article that that Raamon and I put together for Forbes magazine that was just appeared a couple of weeks ago, where we talked about what CEOs and world-class athletes had in common. We focused on this quality of being in the zone. And I think those are really good qualities, because that's what we're focusing on with New Mavericks, is what it's like to not only be in the zone, but stay there. So I've done some research, which I also can speak from a personal level, having been a professional dancer and athlete. Not professional athlete, but professional dancer, is one of those qualities that really you exhibit, or when you're in the zone, what are you made out of? How do you act? And it's really, they come from a place of being. You could call them actions, things that you could practice, but they're really inner qualities of development, and that's why I call them states of being. In that Forbes article, we had this great little section on Billie Jean King, who was probably the greatest women athletes of all time, describing this beautiful in-the-zone experience. And some of the qualities that are, I pulled out, what are the key qualities there? She mentioned, like, unself-conscious invincibility, detached observation, total concentration, tranquility, euphoric joy. And there's this sense that this is the kind of experience that makes life worth living. There's an author, a famous author, who wrote a book, this best-selling book called The Rise of Superman, Steve Kotler. He described really flow as this optimal state of consciousness, a peak state where we both feel our best and perform our best. That's a state that's worth having, and it's, you could say that unself-conscious, the ability to be unself-conscious is a practice, but it's really a state of being. When you get stable in these qualities through some of the practices we'll be talking about later in this conversation, those things get stable inside. The goal is to get them so these momentary experiences of being in the zone become stabilized. So that's our goal with New Mavericks right now, is to figure out how to make these in-the-zone qualities stable, and that's why we've called it the integration zone. There's a couple other, once again, it's hard to tell whether you could call them practices or states of being, but some of the things in this article also, in this Forbes article, also explore certain qualities that people who are in the zone have all the time. One, and this may be, you could call this a mindset, it's a state of being, is this quality of being grateful and acceptance. That's a state of being that I think is quite powerful, because what that does is cultivate the experience of immediacy and the perfection in the moment, when you're accepting life just the way it is. That's a very important quality to peak experience. The opposite of this mindset is resistance. The minute we get into resistance, we step out of the flow. Here's another one, a key mindset one, is through every peak experience of being in the zone, they've noticed that these top athletes, CEOs, musicians, something precedes it. It's letting go. People who have the ability to be in this let-go state, what it does, it's not giving up your goals, but it shifts to the field of all possibilities, new possibilities. We don't have the control over the fruits of our action, just over the action alone. So right there, it puts you completely in the moment when you actually can live from this let-go kind of state. And I think that author of the famous book Flow, which, if I can pronounce his name, it shows that I'm in the flow, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. No one can pronounce his name, but he's a brilliant writer of that book that kind of set the whole trend of being in the zone in the 80s. He said, it's when we act freely for the sake of the action itself rather than for ulterior motives, then we learn to become more than what we were. And that's really about what we're getting into. We're trying to figure out a way to become more than what we are and what we were all the time, to extend and expand ourselves to this whole new field of being. This is our character. And I think that is a good conclusion that we can move from here, is when I talk about these qualities of character that are in tune and aligned and connected with being in the zone. And I would suggest that everyone take a look at this Forbes article, and the announcement that went out there is the link for it, and I think you'll get a better handle on what we're talking about. These qualities of character that support being in the zone, and the conclusion is we want to avoid those qualities of character that don't support that or that are not conducive to the zone. Things like unclear goals, strain, or resistance in your work. That's the opposite. So now we're going to shift to the next level. The next phase here is, now that we have these states of being, which is consciousness, and certain qualities of character that are supportive of being in the zone, now what do we actually do with this? How do we actually lead with this on the ground, on the street? And for this, we're going to bring in a real expert in the field who's is Dr. Warren Blank. I've known Warren for about 30 years, and for 30 years he's probably the hardest working man in the management business. He has traveled since he formed his leadership and organizational development firm in 1986, which is the Leadership Group. He has worked with clients all over the world, probably covered every single continent. His clients include over 70 Fortune 500 firms and over 100 different government organizations. He's the author of 5 leadership books, including one of my favorites, 9 Natural Laws of Leadership, and he has his PhD and MBA from the University of Cincinnati. So Warren, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be here. Great to talk with all of you.
And we're gonna, you really have a great deal of expertise in this area of what is our leadership capacity, and maybe you can even describe to us what is leadership capacity, the way you defined it in terms, and the way you work with it.
Thank you, Michael. From my side, what we need to recognize is leading, taking the lead, being a leader is about getting people to willingly follow you. And if we give another moment here for that slide to come up. Next slide. Willing followers is what makes the leader unique. Willing followers is that capacity to provide direction and influence people to commit to a course of action. I've been talking about this since 1989, and I picked this up from an article that was actually written in 1969 by a guy named Charles Holdeman. And he argued that leading is about getting people to follow you, which is different than the manager role. Most leadership research, most leadership books, most leadership training classes, they don't make that clear distinction between the leader and the manager role, or the leader and the boss role. Being a manager is about being in charge. That's a good thing. We need people to guide and direct their staff. It's about using your position power. Leadership transcends that kind of influence. Leadership is about gaining commitment. It's what I call influence beyond authority. It's based on person power. And that goes back to what Raamon was saying and Michael was saying about consciousness. The ability to get people to follow you is to connect with them on that subtle field of intelligence, that subtle field of creativity, that subtle field of awareness in which they want to follow you. That's that person-to-person connection that occurs when leaders take initiative and they build the kind of relationships that get people to follow them. So I'm going to give you a moment here to catch up with my slides here. As this slide indicates, being the boss is what President Bush used to say, I'm the decider. And as I said, it's good to be the king, it's good to be in charge, but leadership is more than that. Leadership goes beyond that. And that's because it creates that sense of awareness in another person that there's a value in willingly committing to what the leader has to say. There's a value in what the leader's course of action is. So as I say, leadership is influence beyond authority. It transcends the command and control behavior that a manager would use. And see, that comes from the outside. Management authority comes from the organizational structure, from the roles, from the policies and the procedures. Leadership comes from the inside. It comes from that sense of camaraderie, that sense of rapport, that sense of trust that people have with the person who's leading them. Give you a moment here to click the slides forward a little bit. Anyone who's ever played soccer, that's why I put that picture of the guy. You get a yellow card. You can't argue with the referee. The referee's in charge. But as I say, leadership's about that commitment, that person-to-person power. So how do we gain that? Well, we build a kind of rapport that causes people to want to follow up. We build credibility. We build trust. And all of those qualities, all of those behaviors are a function of the nature of the awareness the follower has of the leader, the connection of consciousness the leader has with the follower. Now, of course, to do that, if we go to the next slide, you have to provide direction. You have to offer a course of action. Of course, managers also provide direction. But managers get us to do what we're supposed to do, to fulfill required standards that the organization sets out. Leaders step up when people don't know what to do. That's, again, where consciousness comes in, that creative spark of intelligence, where the leader realizes we're not taking appropriate action, so we need to do something different. Or nobody's taking action, the next point, because nobody knows what to do. So leaders, again, have that ability to fill in the gap of awareness that people have. They also step up when the established systems, the next slide, or the next point, I mean, when the established systems don't apply. I always like to use the example of a organization that has an exit door with a sign above it. And when it's required to leave the building, we know where to go. We go out the exit door. But what happens if that exit door is blocked? What happens if people don't know what to do because the system, the management structure doesn't apply? Go to the next slide. That's where leaders step up. This is what I call the leadership arena. That arena of uncertainty, of ambiguity, that arena of change, which didn't play very well on that slide, but that arena of change that always infects organizations. There's always some unresolved problem that comes up. There's always some unexplored opportunity. It's the leader's consciousness that enables them to perceive what others don't, that enables them to recognize opportunities and possibilities. This is what I call the non-prescribed road that leaders take us down. This transcends doing what you're supposed to do or carrying out established procedures. It's that awareness of the big picture and of the local action the leader needs to take. The technique that I always like to talk to executives about is going into the gap. The next slide. The gap is the place where consciousness gains another perspective, where awareness becomes lively about the possibility or the opportunity or the problem or the obstacle. I call that bifocal consciousness, if you go to the next slide. It's that unique capacity to have that both wide-angle vision, that's not playing very well, that wide-angle vision to see the long term, but also that ability to go into the gap and see the ability to focus sharply on the day-to-day, the hour-to-hour, the minute-to-minute. Most leadership happens at that level, I would argue. Most leadership happens at the local level. There are very few Steve Jobs and Bill Gates around, but every day the vision that Steve Jobs had for his company or the vision that Bill Gates had for his company were carried out in meetings and small group interactions. That's that focus on the details, on what Bill Gates calls the granularity of life. So this is what leadership capacity is about. All those wonderful qualities that Raamon and Michael talked about, they get manifested into specific behaviors, into behaviors that enable us to go into the gap, that enable us to build those quality of relationships that people trust us and want to follow us. So those are a few comments that I think that translate the notion of leadership character into leadership capacity.
Warren, I got to just jump right in with there with a question, because I'm fascinated with this whole idea of gap that you've come up with. I was reading about in your book, and it seems to me that that is one of the most important areas for a leader to shift into that, which I think I've talked to you about. I've been doing some research on some of the ancient epics because I love heroic quests. One of the most famous is called the Ramayana, which is the ancient epic from India, and actually throughout all of Asia. And one of the things that the hero of the Ramayana always did, his name was Ram, was to always expand the frame of reference. when you most hold the most comprehensive frame of reference possible, then really the solution to the problem unfolds. And that's the way I see GAP. Could you comment on that in terms of how that plays out in your experience with working with managers?
I think you're right, and I think that's a good way to say it. The structure of our consciousness can be understood from a behavioral level in terms of that word you use, those reference points of awareness that we have. So, for example, if you're a manager in the bottling industry, you bottle Coca-Cola and Sprite, your reference points are how do we make more and better bottles. That's all you think about every day. If you're a manager in a software company, you think about how do we improve the quality of code. Well, in order to go into the GAP, you have to challenge those reference points. You have to challenge your way of thinking. We know all about biases that we all have. One of them is confirmation bias. We look for things that confirm what we already know. Going into the GAP would be asking some simple questions. What is it I don't know about this circumstance? What are the biases that I have that are causing me to not look at things from an alternate perspective, to not go into the GAP? This is why I think it's important to engage your followers, to lead with your 3 I's, to involve, to inform, to include them. Sam Walton was a great example of this at Walmart. He says he got 99% of his ideas by talking to somebody else, by getting their perception on how to make the store better. He was trying to continually change his reference points by going into the GAP. So I think your comment is right on, Michael. That's the process. How can I look at things from another perspective? How am I being limited by my current reference points?
So there's so many interesting areas you've covered, Warren, here. Is there something maybe you could just kind of give us this final summation of how capacity, how we really move from capacity to, or how actually capacity is the foundation for us to actually display our character in the world?
Yes, because the first and most important skill, I argue, is expanding awareness, knowing yourself better. What are your strengths? Where do you need to improve? Understanding other people better, being able to read people, to understand where they're coming from. And then, of course, expanding awareness to go into the GAP and understand your environment better. Now, that's where Alaric comes in, because he knows that this all starts in the gray matter behind your eyeballs. So the more you can overtly expand awareness in terms of your behavior, the more able you'll be to demonstrate the kind of character that Michael and Raamon talked about. And Alaric will give us a good understanding of how that happens on the level of brain chemistry.
So that's a great place to segue, Warren. So thank you so much for part 2 of our exploration from character to capacity. Now we're shifting to chemistry. And by the way, we're going to have a dialogue between Warren and Alaric after Alaric's section, because I just think that there's really interesting, potential interesting back and forth between the two of them. So I'd like now to introduce Dr. Alaric Arinander, who has been, I know he looks young there, but he's been conducting brain research for some 45 years. I know he started when he was about 5, I believe, dissecting his brother's brain. He's been the past faculty at UCLA, Mayru in Switzerland. He's the director of the Brain Research Institute and president of the Leaders Brain Consulting Group. He's been presenting internationally for some 30 years to business, military, and government agencies on enhancing creative potential of the individual and institutions by using, and this is the key point, evidence-based methods to maximize brain potential. So Alaric, I welcome you, and we can now shift into, and this is an actually interesting point, because we like to think of chemistry, and the way Raamon introduced it, as the hard wiring. But the whole thing, having just had a dialogue with you just the other day about this, Alaric, is the brain, as we are finding out right now, is not a rock, it's a river, constantly transforming. This is the whole area of plasticity. So maybe that's a good jump-off point for you to dive into this area of our so-called hard wiring, which is actually quite fluid.
Thank you, Michael, and everybody Warren and Raamon and Paulo. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight and all those who are viewing this event. Michael brought up the point of the brain and its wiring system. I think the fact that we're all together listening right now, we're all attempting to learn more, and the basis of learning is the fact that the brain can change itself. So unlike a computer we normally think about, the human brain is very plastic. This is neuroplasticity. In fact, there's a slide there. Because what you experience, basically, is the basis of what you become. When we go to grade school, we learn some basic things, and we spend enough time at it, we change how our cells are wired together, the contacts, we change chemicals, we change our DNA. We change everything when we're listening to the teacher tell us about some great poet or scientist or great business person. Throughout our education, we're relying on neuroplasticity. In fact, this particular event and new Mavericks is founded on the point that the brain is plastic. Otherwise, we'd be doing exactly what we'd be doing for the rest of our life and never progress from good to great. So we have this great possibility that the brain is designed to become great. Everybody's brain was designed to be great, and I'm going to go through 3 areas of research, one in detail and the other 2 more peripherally in this time frame, to talk about personal development in the brain. And when we think about how we can change our brain, how we can grow and become what we want to become, how we can move to new vistas of capabilities and visionary transformation, we can remember that there's really 2 types of learning. And most of the learning we've done in our life is of these 2 types. One is the one we think about all the time. We get on our bicycle and you ride the bicycle for a certain amount of time and you finally learn how not to fall off. If you listen to the teacher, after a while you can add 2 and 2. So these are specific performances, specific local changes in the wiring. You get better with the motor cortex if you ride the bicycle. You get a little better on the auditory cortex if you play an instrument, and so forth. So there are easy ways to learn, but you have to remember that most people go through about 18, 25 years of education. Now, in all of that, we're learning all these different subjects. But we should realize that probably by the time we're in high school and in early college, almost everything has been set. Everything has been on the big level, on the holistic level. Who we are, our character, our personalities, our personal development has been molded. In fact, a lot of it has been molded by the time we're teenagers, but the research, which I'll get into in a moment, suggests it happens in early college. So the first thing to move on into this is that there are these specific modes of learning, and therefore we're rewiring the brain in specific ways. And then there are more global performances, more global, we can go back to the other slide, thanks, more global ways of performing. So we have this local versus global. We have more specific versus more holistic. We find as the more global, our basic character is molded early on and stabilizes in early college, we could say. Whereas afterwards we could learn a new accounting program or learn to play an instrument if we want to. But basically it is very, very difficult to change people's characters and personalities, to move personal development beyond this early college area. So let's go into the research then that supports this whole notion, because in New Mavericks we want people to think that yes, they can move forward, they can use this neuroplasticity as it was designed by nature, and achieve these great heights of capability. Now, one of the ways to reach for that is the research done over a decade ago by Jim Collins. And you probably read his books or know about the research. It's just beautiful work showing what succeeds and what does not succeed in the world of business, and what are the characteristics of those leaders that made it happen one way or the other. And he came up, without going into detail in this particular talk, he came up with what are called level 5 leaders. And these are the individuals that share certain characteristics. Now, from that point, even before that, there was a lady, her name was Jane Lovinger, and she created a very robust personality staging. That personal development actually goes through very concrete stages of development in everybody. we go through the same stages. And in her research, she finds that there are 9 stages. The first 3 are pre-conventional. We grow up from day 0. And by the time we're about 18 or so, we move into the conventional realm of development, and that's level 5 and 6. But there are actually 9 levels. And after conventional, what is available to us is what's called post-conventional, after the conventional. I bring up this series or gradations between pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional because if you had a graph in front of you, you could see that there's a line that starts at birth, and by the time we're 18 or so, this line just heads for the sky. And then right about college age, it flattens out and completely becomes horizontal and plateaus. This is considered a glass ceiling. It's considered by many in the field, and this has been going on for many, many decades now with a lot of research, to be a frozen state of human potentiality. I'll give you an example. If you were to take a room of 100 CEOs or top managers or business leaders or military leaders or government people, really well matured individuals, and you were to give them this simple test, you would find that maybe 1 out of those 100 people had reached that 9th level or that highest level called integrated. Another 3 or 4 or 5% would have been in the earlier stages before that, but still post-conventional, doing very, very well. But about 85%, 90% of everybody in that room would still be in the conventional level of development. That means they've never really tapped into the most profound levels available to them that the human brain, through its neuroplasticity, offers. Because in these higher stages, the stages 7, 8, and 9, and so forth, one is more inner-directed, or self-actualized, or having more of a self-referral frame of reference. Here we have growth of an inner sense of self that provides personal autonomy and identity. Here we have ideals and values coming from inside, instead of orienting to and being dependent upon and dominated by the outside of oneself. We have rules and norms that come and flow from the inside that match with those on the outside to a greater extent. These individuals have differentiated the self from roles and expectations of authorities, and they define moral values in terms of what they think is correct. These people are extraordinarily flexible, they're tolerant of ambiguity, of people, they have an inner sense of fulfillment, they live with deeply moral principles, their compass is really rock solid, and they have mutual respect and acceptance of a lot of individual behavior around them. So these people are what are considered self-referral or post-conventional or integrated individuals. And again, in a room of people, maybe 1 or 2% are like this, a few are getting close, but the vast majority of people have frozen in these earlier stages, stage 5. And this is the norm in Western society. And this is the case whether you're looking at military or government or business or sports. The vast majority of people have frozen and they've never moved off of that stage from early college years. So this glass ceiling because we can look through it and we can see rare individuals, great people that have achieved certain levels of competency and character, and we want that. But how do you get through that glass ceiling? Well, there's some research done over the last 30, 40 years, and many people have used this test and have tried many, many programs. And Warren has referred to a lot of these consulting programs. And what we found is that this glass ceiling is independent of your education, basically, independent of your gender, independent of your job. It's basically a very strong platform that says that something's missing in how we educate people and what experience we give people so they can develop their full creative potential. There was an experiment done almost a decade ago where they took a whole group of MBA students in the college years, and of course this has been done many times, and every time they do these studies, they find it's almost impossible to change people's in any significant way into these post-conventional areas. However, there was this other group of MBAs, and they tested them, and then they went back several years later and tested them again, and lo and behold, the people who actually made the test and worked with the test every day were astonished. they found that now, in the post-conventional zone, instead of maybe 5 or 8% of the people being now, there's now 54%. And 34% are actually in the highest possible level of integrated. And what these individuals had added to their educational program, besides the MBA activities that are normal, was a use of meditation. And this comes back to what's been mentioned several times now in this event. And Warren in particular talked about the idea that there are reference points of awareness. And one of the most fundamental is how aware we are of ourself and the depth of what we can be. So we could unfreeze our creative potential. Because this meditation and this research, very well done research, has shown this is true. Now there are many people out there that are using these staging, and they have some different names for them. Joseph and Joyner and other people have shown that you can actually try to help people move. But this meditation is the one published research I've seen, and one I'm aware of, that's able to actually unfreeze human potential in a very dynamic and bold way. And so this use of meditation is another form of that GAP, or that gap that Warren had mentioned. I love that phrase he brought out, that here is gaining another perspective. In this case, meditation is a way of gaining a perspective on a more holistic, deep understanding of oneself. And it's a way to globally rewire the human brain, as opposed to having specific local changes in brain dynamics. With local, as we remember from before, the local changes are relatively easy to construct. But to have a global shift in brain dynamics to correspond to and support a global shift in our personal development, our character, and so forth, to the higher levels of self-referral functioning is very difficult. Our next slide. And we can see, if we look at brain research, that if you could take the CEO, that's the Chief Executive Officer, and in the brain, that's the very front of the brain, or the prefrontal cortex. If you were to measure with EEG, and it's very simply done, a couple minutes of eyes closed EEG, and look at brainwave coherence, how different parts of the brain relate to each other, how correlated they are, how integrated they are with each other, then you could say, well, if a person's brain is more coherent, more integrated, what are the characteristics that you find in that individual's life based on psychological and other tests? And then if you press the button again, research over the years has shown that individuals with more brain coherence, if you start in the upper right-hand corner, individuals with more brain coherence, they're more creative than the average person. They have more inner self-referral orientation. They have more self-development awareness available to them. As you come down the right-hand side, there's less anxiety. There's huge resilience to any stress in life. They're able to learn better and faster. They're more aware of who they are and what people around them need and are doing. Their body works better, neuromuscular efficiency. They can compute things faster and better. They have more raw intelligence. It's very difficult to change raw intelligence. They're not so crazy. There's a certain scale for that. There's more emotional stability. As you come across the top, they have greater grip of concepts. They don't lose track of the little details, but they can take those details and integrate them into a bigger, more dynamic, more successful picture. And then finally, they have higher levels of moral reasoning. And again, I don't know of any other technique except for this meditative technique which is bringing about higher moral reasoning spontaneously. So we can see that if we can enliven through increasing order through meditation, this executive control center of the human brain, we can bring about increased global order and have a change. And actually published papers have shown, and we did research, Dr. Fred Travis and I, some almost 10 years ago, we created a brain integration scale, which means that with a little bit of EEG analysis, you can actually see how well a person's brain is functioning in the direction of this global integration. So what happens when we practice meditation? And in particular, this research was done with a meditation called transcendental meditation, in which one just sits quietly for a few minutes each day with eyes closed and practices this simple, effortless technique, getting great rest and inner awareness. That this technique does two things. And it brings about a strong value of integration, because now we can have not only horizontal development, where we have more and more ability to have local and detailed and specific performance upgrades, but at the same time we can have very powerful vertical development. we can go deep within ourselves and pull out within our own self all those inner values of creation, creative intelligence, and so forth. So in summary then, we can see that if we just can have a simple self-referral functioning, like in these meditative states, they can create a vast array of global brain coherence, which correlates with this expanded awareness, expanded consciousness. This brings about a global rewiring of the human brain. We're now doing studies in different laboratories around the world showing that the brain rewiring, when people who practice transcendental meditation, is quite extensive and supports 50 years of research showing profound EEG and brain integration changes. So we have simple technologies to create concrete global results. And as Raamon was saying in the earlier introduction, he gave an individual, the person said, when there was a problem came up, he says, I don't know how to solve that problem. I don't know, but we will. In that phrase really encapsulates what I was trying to say in these few minutes here with this research. And that is, I, a very self-referral basis, don't know because I don't have all the details yet. I don't have all the knowledge yet. So I, self-referral, I'm being quiet and establish my own self. But we, not I, but we, an expanded view encompassing the environment with that self-referral basis, we will. In other words, this dynamic point of action of success. I don't know, but we will. This is how consciousness is a platform for greater and greater integration and success. So I want to just leave with this idea that, in our last slide, that through this increased self-referral functioning, we can have, you could click through, thank you. We can have more self-referral functioning of our awareness and more self-referral functioning of brain physiology. And if people who are listening to this event think that meditation is something that not too sure about, let me just remind them that almost every hospital in the world now uses some form of meditation. Almost every research institution studying brains excuse me, is studying meditation. So this is really a current technology that will dominate the world of business as we go into the future. And of course, there are numerous individuals, highly successful individuals in the military and government and in business and so forth, and education, who practice transcendental meditation. So we want to harness the inherent plasticity of every single brain. Every brain has this huge ability to become great. We want to be able to act in a spontaneous way, not have to overthink and be worrying about things, but spontaneously, excuse me, spontaneously come up with the right decision, the right way to bring people together and solve the problem. And we want it to be sustainable. We want it to be there at every moment of our life. We want it to be there to support us as we move into the future. We want it to be there as a point of reference. I don't know, but we will. And I want to thank you all for your attention. And I'd love to interact with Warren a bit if he has some time and in this event, to see how we can move this whole concept of self-leadership to help sustain people in this area.
So I'm going to jump in. Thank you, Alaric. That was a great summary, really deep insights into these stages of development and how we can move through this glass ceiling. Now I'd like to, Raamon and I are going to just facilitate this next section. We've gone a little over, so we might shorten this a little bit, just maybe 7 minutes or so, to just get some interaction here, because Warren, you're out there in the world, you're interacting with managers, CEOs. Alaric gave this really powerful frame of reference of what's possible. Maybe I'd like to hear Warren comment on how what Alaric said can be structured in a practical reality.
Well, thank you, Michael. I also appreciate Alaric's comments and insights. I think the practical reality transition is to, first of all, identify what are the behaviors I need to work on to change. You know, the brain, Alaric knows this better than I, the neurons that fire together wire together. And we know that that can change, so if we rewire the brain by trying new behaviors, by practicing new behaviors, then we can become more skillful at those behaviors. So I think that the move from character, those lofty concepts of being creative and intuitive, into action really does have an impact on the brain chemistry, and that then translates into more spontaneous, as Alaric said, right action, more spontaneous, effective action. And just one simple way to think about this is if you've learned to drive a car with a stick shift, in the early moments of your trying to master that technique, that technology, you went down the road with a jerky, bumpy kind of behavior. And now people can hurtle down the highway at 60 miles an hour, shifting and braking and turning and signaling while they're listening to the radio and talking on their cell phones, because the brain has now been hardwired in that new reality, that new spontaneous right action reality. So managers can improve, leaders can improve, anyone can improve their interaction behaviors by practicing those behaviors with feedback, of course, so that it becomes part of their spontaneous repertoire.
That's definitely what a lot of leaders need to understand there, Warren. Thanks very much for that. I'm just curious how you guys, just one interesting situation we have when we work with our clients. We work with CEOs, we also work with their team, and we can work with salespeople. We work with quite a range of people. And it's always interesting the different perspectives they all have and the different capacities they all have. And it's in some ways quite frustrating for a CEO to have to deal with people that don't have the capacity to see things and feel things and know things that they do. Because they are, just to be a CEO, you have to be quite expanded and quite developed. So I'm just wondering, both from your experience, Warren, and also Alaric, how do you bridge that gap so that the CEO and the people he's leading are less perceiving things differently, that they're more on the same wavelength?
Alaric?
Well, go ahead, Warren. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I think that, we've known this for 100 years of management theory and research. It starts with the more effective selection process, more realistic job previews. What are we looking for, and what skills do you have? But that's a big picture kind of response. So more locally, if I was a CEO struggling with my staff, one technique I like to talk about is what I call question power. The CEO needs to, or any manager needs to, ask better questions to draw out from people their latent potential, their latent insights, and then respond to their answers with more questions. In Japan, I think they have the 7 whys. Why? You just keep asking why to drill people down. Now, you'll get, of course, to a place where people can't answer anymore because of their capacity limits, because of their brain function limits. But I think that we give up too soon on people. I think that effective managers, effective executives know how to draw that creative intelligence out of people by asking the right questions. So that's one simple way to move people past their limits, their boundaries.
Yeah, I would just add, thank you, Warren, that's beautiful. I would add that individuals who are trying to lead these or direct all this, they really have to show respect and acceptance of the people that they're working with. Not everybody's going to be the same, nor should they be the same, because that's where the diversity gives rise to that grand unity. So we want the individual differences, so we need to give them the space and the warmth of interaction to allow them to grow into their greatness, and to utilize it as best we can and select them one way or the other and move them about as necessary. But in addition to this sort of personal interaction, it really, again, falls back to the leader or the individual who is trying to motivate this entire group of development. And that is, that individual has to be more self-referral. They have to be more settled on their own inner reality. They have to be more inside in terms of their foundation. So when they go out, they have more to offer, and there's more flexibility, there's more tolerance of ambiguity. They can deal with change and unknown. And one way to do that, and probably the most important global way, is to make sure that these individuals are rested. I mean, if somebody's tired and stressed, then even the best of all programs are not going to be very effective. And if the individuals that they're trying to deal with are tired and stressed, then of course they're not going to have much of a acceptance of any change. So it's important that the system at all levels be full of more and more orderliness so that the system can perform at higher and higher levels, because that's what feeds the brain. If you want the brain to grow and develop, you have to feed it order, not disorder.
And just very briefly, I like what Alec said. It's the phrase I like to use is you need to be an M&M, a model and a motivator. So the senior executive needs to model those skills of question power and going into the gap and all those things we talked about. But they also need to represent that in their own behavior. They need to be rested and refreshed. And that's what motivates other people. So effective executives are M&Ms for excellence.
I'd like to also invite Paolo D'Angelo, who's often in the role as our silent witness. Has lots of wisdom and depth, and I know he's been more in the observer role today, but sometimes he just has a way of getting right to the heart of the matter. Paolo, do you have any insights here or questions you'd like to prod Alaric or Warren with about what we've heard so far?
Thank you, Michael. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes. So Dr. Alaric actually made a very good point, and his point was how aware we are of ourselves. And this really captures a thought. This is the only thing worth knowing. Analyzing thoughts and action keeps us small. If we really want to be real leaders, then we need to know ourselves. This is the basis of real leadership.
That's you went right to the heart of the matter, Paolo. Warren, when you're out there working in the world with people all over the world, you just came back from East Africa, then you were in the Middle East, I believe in Saudi Arabia. How do these concepts, which might seem fairly abstract, how do they translate to top leaders, top CEOs out there in other countries and other cultures?
I find good results. I've, as you mentioned, been in the Middle East, been in Africa, been throughout Europe, been to Asia, and I don't find that people have a difficulty understanding the fundamentals. They clearly understand the importance of managing themselves and taking care of themselves, as Alaric said. They clearly recognize that the model that they present influences others positively or negatively. And they also recognize that nobody starts out their job career what I call RIP, retired in place. But some people lose the motive somewhere along the way. They lose that desire somewhere along the way. Their sense of self gets lost. So I think that universally people understand the importance of how aware they are of themselves, as Paolo said, how aware they are of each other, and how able they are to model and motivate excellence in every action that they take.
And I think that we can have right emblazoned over our door at New Mavericks, know thyself. That's probably the starting point for both character, capacity, and chemistry. I think just because of time, I would like this conversation to go on longer, but we're trying to keep these webinars to an hour, so I think I'd like to shift now to our final phase, where Raamon and I are going to try to encapsulate everything that's been said so far. So Raamon, you are the master of going into all the point values, so maybe you want to just give a few points in summary of everything that's happened. And thank you so much, Alaric and Warren, for joining us today. You can please stick around. We'll have a little meeting at the very end, but just, Raamon, you want to dive in and give us a little summary of some of the points?
Yeah, I mean, like, wow, there's so much depth of wisdom that came out. It's really hard to encapsulate in a few words, but just if I give some brushstrokes to it, I'm not even going to summarize my own speech because maybe Michael will do that for me. But, Michael brought out, the values of being in the zone based on your character, and the character qualities of having that grateful mindset, the value of gratefulness, the value of letting go to allow the field of all possibilities to come to you, to be in that flow where you're just able to act from a deeper level of yourself, and being able to achieve goals by being in the zone. And if you're not in the zone, then you're not being true to your character, and that's clear by not having clear goals or straining. And then we had Warren, who really got into how leaders need to transcend that command and control instinct to be able to have that value of trust and that value of really going into the gap and coming out with a new perspective on things. He also talked about, Michael made a comment there about this comprehensive frame of reference. And Warren said, it's by going to the gap, you challenge your reference points and you start to come up with, questions and question yourself in terms of what you don't know. What are the biases that you may be holding that are causing you to be blocked? So by changing your reference points, by going to the gap, then you're not so limited by your reference points. And that the most important skill Warren advocated was expanding awareness. To go into the gap is how you do that, to get a deeper and better understanding. And then Alaric talked about the brain is really subject to neuroplasticity, and that we have been conditioned up until a certain age, and there's a lot of local development that goes on in terms of motor cortex and audio cortex, depending on what we're doing. And then there's this global holistic value that then helps you rise beyond just that conventional development, and that by continuing to develop the neuroplasticity of the brain, then we can more have this value of self autonomy and inner direction and tolerance of ambiguities and a greater sense of fulfillment and moral reasoning. And having this, the real value of being a leader is this self-referral integrated value, and that we can go beyond the glass ceiling, things that like gender and job has kind of bound us to certain levels of development, but there's ways that they've proven through meditation that you can actually become more aware of your potential and unlock more of that human potential, unfreeze it, as Alaric said. And it gives you that ability to gain another perspective. It's like a global shift. So he correlated having more integrated brainwave coherence leads to such things as greater creativity and orientation, grasping concepts easier, and having greater moral reasoning. So as we increase orderliness, then what we find is that there's greater executive power or executive control over the brain. And he talked about transcendental meditation as being one of those programs that does create this integration in the brain, which gives both horizontal and vertical development and gives a vast arrays of brain coherence and has this global rewiring effect on the brain. And I love the way Alaric took that quote that I had from our client in terms of he was both self-referral and he was global at the same time. He was both I and we, and he was able to see things from both perspectives. So that's basically the summary that I have in terms of, there's so much to cover here. I think I've covered.
Yeah. Pretty darn good once again, Raamon. I mean, I was going to just kind of pull it together. Really, we started out figuring out a way to translate big vision to concrete reality. And I hope we've approached that concept in terms of seeing really the big picture as much as possible, and always being aware of how it can be practically applied on the ground. And I think these three qualities of character, capacity, and chemistry, really when you look at it, the commonality is character, who you are and what you're made out of. Capacity, the depths from which you lead from and how you put that out into action. And then chemistry, your constitutional makeup, which we found is quite plastic. All these three are unified on that level of who you are and where you come from and what you're made out of. And really, and we've seen that there's a way to find a common ground in that, and that's what you opened up with, Raamon, which was that whole field of consciousness. Consciousness is that kind of unified basis of all that.
Right. As Paulo put, it's that being aware of ourselves is being aware of that consciousness that is ourself, and that by knowing ourselves, it's really the basis for being real leaders.
Do you have any final words of wisdom on that, Paulo? As long as you want to jump in here.
Yes, okay. So, final word of yes. So knowing thyself will actually lead to fulfillment on the outer level.
That's it.
Simple.
Really, because everyone's wanting to figure out a way to take all these big concepts, and the ultimate value is our fulfillment, because that's where the fulfillment for ourselves, the people we lead, and the organizations that we are a part of. So with that, I'd like to close and thank once again Alaric Aranander and Warren Blank for joining us here today. It's been I think we've covered a lot of material. It's really just the beginning. I see this as a starting point, and we hope to work with you both on an ongoing basis. I'd like to close with a couple quick action steps that you can do. Is if you go to our websites, newmavericks.com, click on the Holy Grail you'll see on the slide there. I love that image because we're going on a journey. Our journey is really to take us, it's a journey for integrated success, because you don't see many people talking about that. You see people talking about one-dimensional success, that genius kind of approach that might create some real success and achievement, but some imbalance. We're trying to create integrated success, and the term we've coined for that is taking you into the integration zone. If you click on that Holy Grail at the bottom of that page, you have a couple choices. You can do a free 30-minute integration zone session with Paulo, Raamon, or myself, and there's also a free download there to get the 3 steps to be in your unique zone. So those are available at newmavericks.com, and that page on the Integrated Success Quest, which is you get to by clicking the Holy Grail. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for listening. And until our next integration zone session, let's all stay in the flow. Thank you and good night.